When you give too much feedback about praise, it often increases the chances of students cheating.
Teachers are kind.
Yeah.
And sometimes that kindness is a killer. The culture and the climate of the classroom should be such that errors are seen as opportunities to learn.
Yeah.
Whereas they're not. In most classrooms, they're seen as embarrassments. If I look at the research we and others have done about the most common emotion in classrooms is boredom. And what is boredom? The absence of challenge. How do you succeed in your environment? Our environment now is social media and AI.
Yeah.
There's a lot of teaching we have to do. We cannot ignore it. We cannot pretend it's not there. And banning it is not going to lead to it being uninvented.
Are you looking for brilliant CPD that is inspiring, illuminating and impactful? Well, Inner Drive's training is evidence-informed, engaging and makes a real difference. Whether it is in person at your training days or online through our Teachers CPD Academy, Inner Drive is transforming how schools and colleges do professional development. Email us at info@innerdrive.co.uk to take your staff training to the next level.
Hello and welcome to Inner Drive's Science of Learning podcast with me, Bradley Bush. This is the podcast where we discuss the latest and indeed greatest cognitive science and educational studies, because we believe there is absolute gold in the research, and if we can make it accessible and put in the hands of the right people, i.e. you, our lovely listeners, and even lovelier subscribers, we think it can be transformational in the lives of students. Normally on the Science of Learning podcast, we talk about one topic and do 3 studies. We're doing something slightly different today in our live show. Today we're talking about one researcher and my 3 favourite studies that he has done. These studies include feedback, learning styles and AI. Please give a warm welcome to the pod, John Hattie.
Great to be here, Brad.
So first of all, I should say a huge thank you, and just to give some context, we're filming this at our Teaching and Learning Summit. We are beyond grateful that you've come all the way over from Australia for it. So thank you so much.
Good to be here.
So before we get going on my 3 favourite studies of yours, I should probably also give you another thanks. And I don't know if you remember this. When we did our first book, my colleague Edward Watson and I, which was called The Science of Learning, we summarised our favourite studies. And then we had a moment of panic where we reached out to each researcher to make sure that we'd actually accurately summarise their research. And you were kind enough to come back and say, yes, we summarised your research well, but also offered to do the foreword, which we thought was incredibly kind and incredibly generous. And I knew you were a man of deep knowledge and great taste because you said it was your book of the decade. And so that kind of gave us a bit more confidence in terms of what we were doing, being a kind of a Google Translate for research. And one of the things you said at the time was that there's so much information and misinformation in the world that translating research is perhaps now more important than ever. And that's been a big part, I think, of your career as well. And so before we talk about your 3 studies that I wanted to get into, I just want to ask you a quick question, if I may. I'm curious to your experience of when you try and explain sometimes quite complex research, this balance and challenge between summarizing the research that's accessible versus staying true and accurate with all the nuance and messiness that research involves. How have you found getting that balance between making it mainstream while also valid and accurate?
Yeah, it's a real dilemma. Like, for example, Visible Learning was my 10th book.
Yeah.
It took me 9 to practice to get it wrong. And it took me 9 to realize that as an academic, I actually should be writing for an audience that's greater than 2 reviewers or 1 examiner. Yeah. Because that's how we're trained, to write for a very narrow audience. We focus, not surprisingly, on method, results. And we miss the point. It's about the story.
Right.
And there was a great article in the 1990s where a group of researchers took a whole series of articles submitted to American Psychological Association journals that were accepted and rejected. And they asked the question, was there a key part of an article that led to accept or reject? Was it the title, the authors, the abstract, the introduction, the review, the method, the results, the conclusions, or the references? And all the variance is in the conclusions. Right. If you're not saying anything, and so I say to my students, read the conclusion first. If they're saying nothing, don't bother with the rest. But that's not how we work as academics.
Right.
And I think the days of evidence are over. We've got so much all over the place. The days of interpreting it are here. And that's why I like your book so much, because it's about the interpretation of evidence.
Yeah.
And like we complain, teachers don't read our work. Well, we don't write for them. We're not very good at storytelling. And it's quite an art to do it. And it took me a long time to realize it's the story, it's the narrative. And so that's why I liked what you were doing.
Well, it's very kind of you to say. We're still working out getting that right balance ourselves, because it's an interesting challenge. I like the idea of it being able to tell a story, because, and I know we're going to talk about AI in a little bit, getting summaries is now very easy these days, but it doesn't win, I think, hearts and minds if it doesn't be able to tell the story of what's the problem people are facing, why does that problem matter, what does the research suggest we can do about that. So yeah, definitely find that narrative and that storytelling interesting. So let's talk, I want to talk about some of the stories then within your studies. We'll do, so study number 1, I should say as well, what we typically do on the pod is every time we, in post-editing, when we uncover a key cognitive science principle that you and I discuss, we'll play our principle ping. And when we discuss the nuance of application, we'll hear a nuanced noise, which changes every time. So today it will sound something a bit like this. Let's talk about your first study. So one of the things I find really interesting about your research, I think you're widely known for your really large scale studies, these like meta-analysis or meta-analysis. I love the smaller studies. I find myself citing them a lot. And I think this study is probably the most common study that I've recommended to other teachers to read about feedback. And I thought it was interesting. You open in the study talking about how feedback is really important. It can be a really good bet to improve learning, but it has such large variability in terms of its impact. And there were 2 different elements, I thought, of the study that I found really interesting. The first one was when you talk about the 4 different types of feedback. So what I thought would be good, rather than me butcher your study, is perhaps if you can give an overview of what the 4 types are, and then I'll tell you what quote stood out to me from in each part. So the first one, you talk about feedback about the person. How would you define what feedback about the person is?
Bradley, you've done a really great job in the introduction today. I really like the way in which you've presented it. It really shows what incredible skills you have. So I'm praising you as a person. I never said anything about the content, about the details, about the way you put it together. Was it a good story? And all kids, like us, love praise.
Yeah.
We do. But the problem is, if I then said to you, Bradley, and by the way, you got 2 facts wrong in that introduction, and then I come back to you 2 days later and said, what do you remember about that praise that I gave you 2 days ago? You will remember all the lovely stuff. So praise dilutes the content. And so the argument we're arguing is that if you want to give praise, please give it. It's the essence of relationships.
Yeah.
But don't mix it up with information about the task.
I see a lot of people confusing praise and feedback.
Yes.
So someone will go, I got great feedback today. And then you ask, what was the feedback? And they basically just said, I got 5 stars. I was told I was brilliant. And it's like, I always wonder, is that even feedback, or is that just
Well, it is
praise?
a kind, and our argument is it's one of the kinds of feedback that has the lowest impact on kids' learning.
Yeah.
In fact, it can be negative. In fact, one of the reasons we wrote the article stemmed from a really great meta-analysis a few years earlier by Kluger and Denise, where they showed a third of feedback was 0 to negative.
Yeah.
And that, as you said, that variability is what it's about. And that's what we were trying to struggle with.
Yeah.
And so one of the arguments was the self-feedback is one of the reasons it's 0 to negative.
And so that Kluger and Denise one, I remember they talk about it being a double-edged sword,
Correct.
Essentially. So the quote you kind of alluded to, that you said in the paper, that this sort of feedback has too little value to result in learning gains. I came across another study by a different researcher that found when you give too much feedback about praise, it often increases the chances of students cheating because they just care about getting the outcome that's going to get them that praise, and they don't care about the means.
And it's worse than
Potentially
that.
what
Like
they did
in the United States, African American and Hispanic kids get 3 times more praise than white kids, and they don't like it.
Right.
Why aren't I getting the same praise you're getting about the work? Why aren't I getting information to help me improve? Why are you just telling me I'm a nice person? And so it's kind of a weird notion, but teachers are kind.
Yeah.
And sometimes that kindness is a killer.
Yeah. I guess that kind of came out a bit from that self-esteem movement, where it was just as much praise as possible was kind of the directive. And then you actually saw the negative consequences, a bit of that. Okay, so if that's feedback about the person. By the way, when you gave you an example about how brilliantly I did in the presentation. We're definitely just going to clip that part up for our marketing material. So that'll be good. Feedback about the task.
Yeah,
about that one.
Like one of the things in the whole visible learning work is everyone wants to argue that their class is different, their school is different. And in the jargon, they're saying these moderators make a difference. It's different in Shanghai than it is in London, etc. And I just can't find that.
Right.
Can't find it anywhere. But there's one big one, and that is the nature of the work you're doing about the content, the facts, the rules, the procedures, the stuff you need to know that, or is it about the depth and the problem solving and the relationships? And so the task, and my argument is I want both because I'm greedy. Whereas what we do in education is we say, no, it's one or the other. It's explicit versus problem solving. It's knowledge rich, and it's just nonsense. There's a right time for that. The first part is information about the content, the task. Have you got it right? You've got an error here. Let's work on the error. And one of our big arguments is that the culture and the climate of the classroom should be such that errors are seen as opportunities to learn. Whereas they're not. In most classrooms, they're seen as embarrassments.
And is that if there's too much focus just on the task feedback?
No, it's just the nature of how students are taught about what a good student is. A good student is one that sits up straight, puts their hand up and thinks they know the answer. Whereas you don't come to school to learn that which you know. It's what you don't know. So to what degree is the classroom welcoming not knowing an error as an opportunity to learn? And so feedback about the task is identifying the errors, making it such that it's seen as opportunities to learn. There's multiple opportunities to learn. There's deliberate practice, which is practice with feedback, practice with information. And we're saying that that is really valuable information. And if the student is working on a task, times table, getting spelling right, that's what the feedback has to be about. Because if you give the kid the feedback about self-regulation when they're dealing with a task, it doesn't work.
Okay, so if there's a good time and place for feedback about the task, I just want to check, because sometimes I know I look back at some of my old presentations, some of the stuff that I've written, and I kind of go, oh, I don't know if I think the same thing as I do now. And I always think that's an interesting part of research that gets well cited. So in the research, you wrote, too much focus only at task level may encourage students to focus on the immediate goal and not the strategies to attain the goal.
Correct.
Which from my mind puts almost not a negative slant on feedback about the task, but quite a limiting view on it.
But the reason for that, Brad, is that when you actually do meta-syntheses of classroom observations, which we've had a go at doing over the years, you find out 90% of the feedback that's given in the class is about the task.
Right.
Written or oral. 90% of what the teacher talks about is about the task. That's why that quote's there. We overemphasize it so dramatically. And kids learn by age 8. They learn that if you want to be safe, know lots. Now, I don't have any trouble with that, except I want more. And I think every teacher wants more. But if you actually get the teachers to say, well, let's analyze what you've done, no wonder kids think it's about getting right and wrong. And no wonder they're looking for the red tick that pins or ticks or crosses. And that's why that statement, we have too much of it and we lose pursuit of the goal. The goal becomes the task, not what you want to use the task for.
So is there a danger then that people conflate marking with feedback? Because if marking tells you like, was the task, did you do it right or wrong? And of course, feedback, in my mind, feedback and marking they can overlap, but they're not necessarily the same.
Marking is a form of feedback, and the trouble is that too many circumstances, the mark is a reflection of the task only.
Okay, so we got feedback about the person, feedback about the task. You referred to feedback about self-regulation, which I think for me was the trickiest one out of the four.
But you missed the third one.
Yeah, no, I was going to build up that one. Fine, we'll do that one first. Go on then. Let's do feedback about the process.
This is where we want. I want you, when you've got some feedback about the task, got some knowledge about the task, I want you to make connections. Like I remember Arthur Koestler's definition of creativity, the bringing together of two or more seemingly unrelated ideas.
Right.
That aha moment. And I'm a big fan of aha moments. Is how do you bring it together? And like take your work. We know that on average, a class of kids asks 2 questions a day about relating ideas that they don't understand before they start off with. And that's pretty miserable.
I hadn't heard that number before, two questions a day.
That's why I said to you when you wrote your first book, I now want a book about student questions, which you then did, is because I think we need to have more student questions. And that's where the feedback about the process is pretty critical, is helping the kids ask the right next questions. And I know you're going to come to AI in a moment.
Yeah.
That's going to be a key
Yeah.
strategy to do if you use AI. You have to be able to ask questions. And kids know it's not their job. They think it's the teacher's job. So we want more feedback about process, about connections, about ideas.
So is feedback about process essentially feedback about the decisions they made,
Yes.
the step-by-steps, the strategies
Yes,
that
yes,
they used?
yes.
You wrote that that's the most effective for enhancing deep learning.
It is, because it's the step between the task and the self-regulation.
Yeah.
And we argue that in that step, the teacher is very much involved in the process, much more than in the self-regulation, where we want release of responsibility to the student.
Yeah. So feedback about self-regulation then. I think whenever I try and explain that to other people, they understand feedback about the person, the task, the process much easier.
Yes.
Feedback about self-regulation is the one that I have people ask me the most questions typically about. So can you clearly define what feedback about self-regulation is and perhaps give an example of it?
Yeah, well, like one of the things we academics do is we take a simple notion and we put a complicated word around it.
Yeah.
And so I've stopped using self-regulation because of what you just said.
Okay.
And we talk, the narrative and metaphor we use is we want our students to drive their learning.
Yeah.
That is self-regulation.
Yeah.
And this is where, like in some of the work that you've been doing recently on scaffolding and differentiation, there's a time in which you ask the students to be the driver.
Yeah.
You take your foot off the pedal and you say, you do it. And we often talk about gradual release of responsibility, which I'm not a fan of, because the word gradual sometimes needs to be deliberate now.
Right.
And so you're doing this task, Bradley. We've talked about with you as a teacher about your process. Now I'm going to get you to do it by yourself. At that point, I'm going to give you feedback that says, look, it seems to me you're going down the wrong way. What do you think you should do next?
Yeah.
And I want to pass it over to you. And I want to listen. I'm still the teacher. And I don't want you to go down cul-de-sacs. I don't want you to get off the highway in the wrong place. But at the other time, sometimes I need you to do that because of error management.
Right.
And it's the most critical skill in learning is knowing when you make an error and how you react to it. And that's the real part of learning at that self-regulation stage, is when you are driving your learning.
Yeah.
And like at that stage, I want you to know how to seek help.
Right.
Whereas a lot of students wait for it. And if they don't get it, they think they're doing the right driving.
Yeah.
They're not. So self-regulation is too jargony now.
Yeah.
It's at that point, I would call it when the student is allowed to drive and encouraged to drive. It's a different kind of feedback.
So it's interesting. So I hadn't made that link between self-regulation and scaffolding, but that description definitely makes sense. You were kind enough to mention that some of the stuff we're doing on scaffolding. I should probably say, so we share a publisher, Routledge, and one of the books in our series with them by two incredible educators, Rachel Ball and Alex Fairland.
I read the book today.
And you told me you read their book, The Scaffolding Effect, today.
Yeah.
It's good, isn't it? It's a really good book. So I'm sure they'll be delighted to know that they have your endorsement on that.
They start off by talking about that notion we all know about Vygotsky, the zone of proximal development, which again is often completely understood. He was talking about that zone where the kids have to get into the driving mode after they've got the task and the challenge. And again, I don't use proximal development because it's too jargony. I say, to what degree is this a challenge? And my argument is every kid loves a challenge.
Yeah.
That's why they play their video games. That's why they play social life and all those kind of things. And when I look at classrooms and the Graham Nuttall's work, 40 to 50% of everything taught the kids know already.
Yeah.
If I look at the research we and others have done about the most common emotion in classrooms is boredom. And what is boredom? The absence of challenge. And so at that self-regulation stage, it really has to be a challenge. And I want kids to enjoy the struggle of the challenge.
Yeah.
And one of the ways you do that is let them loose. But there's a time then when I need to bring them back to give them more task.
Yeah.
If you let loose and I find out you don't know something, task, process. It's an interwoven web that we do here.
Yeah. So one thing that took me by surprise in your study, and I hadn't really thought about it this way, you're right, and I just want to make sure I get it right. You say feedback is more powerful when it provides information on correct rather than incorrect responses. That kind of surprised me at first because I think it's so tempting. I think when I used to teach in a college, it's really tempting to give feedback on the incorrect stuff because it's easy to go, they got something right, they therefore know what they're doing, so I don't need to give feedback on that. And my colleague at Inner Drive, Dr. Claire Badger, she's very interested in this idea of when students get the answer right, but they get it right for either the wrong reason,
Right.
or they didn't know why they got it right. So I was surprised to see that the research suggests it's more effective. Feedback's more effective for correct answers than incorrect answers.
Yeah, exploring the analogy, like you're driving, it's my job as the driving instructor to keep saying to you, yeah, you're doing it right. That was the right thing you did there. So it reinforces. And I know behaviorism is something we're not supposed to talk about anymore, but that reinforcement of the right behaviors is more powerful than the punishment of the wrong behaviors.
Yeah.
Now, I have nothing wrong with error analysis and error management. It's critical in the business.
Yeah.
Provided it's part of the journey.
Right.
Whereas so often wrong says to a kid, you don't understand anything. Well, actually, that's not true. They didn't understand this part.
Yeah.
And of course, we spend a lot of time on error management and teaching the students, how do you know your work's good enough?
Perfect. Okay, so that's study 1. Let's go on to study 2, which is, I think, really interesting. It's a 2023 paper with Hamilton and Dylan Willem on AI. And there's a lot we could talk through in that paper. I always find interesting the research. I was saying this to on a previous pod. I interviewed Daisy Christodoulou on AI, and we talked about interesting challenge for me on research. On good research takes however long to publish, 12 months, 18 months, and yet the rate of change in technology with AI means sometimes the research is outdated before it even comes out. But even still, there are some interesting things that caught my eye in that paper. So first of all, I actually laughed out loud because in your introduction, you talked about how you can get AI to do like a wedding speech in the style of William Shakespeare, or you can do write lyrics about fish and chips in the style of the Beatles. One of my colleagues said they'd pay you £1 if you would sing a song about fish and chips in the style of the Beatles. I'm not going to subject you to asking you to do that now, but I think it gets to the heart of like, there's an amazing amount of quirky things and cool things and fun things we can do with AI. And then we focus on what's the educational element of it. And I think the reason I quite liked your paper is it showed both sides of the coins. You spent a lot of time talking about the potential benefits and also raised some really big concerns about what might go wrong with a lot of AI adoption. So I guess my first question, paper was 2 years ago. What do you see currently as the biggest win in AI in education at the moment? And I guess part 2 of that question would be, if you had to predict in the next few years where things are going, what might be the next big win that might happen?
I want to answer that by coming at it from a slightly different angle. When I looked at the effect of computers coming into education in the 1970s, it's taken 40 to 50 years before the effect of technology on kids' learning has got to even the average 0.4. It's been very slow. And the only question is, why was it so slow? And as Larry Cuban and others argue, it's because it didn't relate to how teachers teach. They use it for efficiency reasons rather than for teaching reasons. And then I look at social media. It's been around 10 years. We never had the discussion about guardrails. And I think we're paying an enormous price
Agreed.
at the moment. Not because social media is bad, but there are incredibly bad uses of it. And it's bullying and the way in which, you know this, and as you know, Australia has banned all social media for under 16-year-olds, which has come into place and it's working quite well.
I was going to say, can I pause on that moment? So that's obviously very different to what we currently have here.
Yes.
How was the initial reaction? Because that's like fairly recent. How has that reaction been? I know that it's not AI, it's social media, but how's that been received by parents, by teenagers, by educators? What's the initial?
It came in December, and that was the start of the school major holidays. So everyone was thinking, well, what's going to happen when kids come back to school?
Yeah.
There is now more students, particularly teenagers, saying it's been a good thing.
Right.
And obviously the parents like it, the schools like it.
Yeah.
And as you know, if a child is on a social media, the social media company gets fined $49 million. And they're looking for the first one. My daughter-in-law is the evaluator for the E-Safety Commission.
Is she?
Looking at all this kind of stuff. And of course, lots of new apps have come up that aren't the ones. So it's early days yet.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like saying we're not allowing kids to smoke under a certain age. We can't let them to drive under a certain, they can't go into an alcohol at a certain age. Of course, there are exceptions. But overall, it's kind of working. But if we had it 10 years ago, it would have been a much more nuanced and I think better discussion. And so I come to AI and say, it's going to have a faster trajectory than computers ever had.
Yeah.
Dramatically faster. And we're going to sit around, and some countries have banned it.
Yeah.
And you think it's not going to be uninvented. And I think that paper, which today I think was a little bit more negative than I would see today,
Right.
is, I still think, I'm pleased we did it, because I like a lot of good AI stuff, but there are boundaries. Now, what some places are doing very wisely, like New South Wales government has invented their own AI that's closed and no one can go out, and they're inappropriate uses. But we also know that kids are using it inappropriately. The cheating has gone up.
Yeah.
The lack of decision making they're doing because they're defaulting to AI has gone up. And so we're going to get smart about that. And so the primary argument I want to put at the moment is that what we need to do is ask, what are the skills and strategies we should be teaching kids to successfully use AI, and teaching teachers? And I want to go back to the one that's dear to your heart, questioning.
Right.
Like, the biggest employment in the AI business is approbative engineers.
Right.
It's the same when you use it. You have to ask it the right question, and you have to follow it up. Remember, it's called Chat GPT because you're supposed to chat to it. If you ask the wrong question, it gives you the wrong answer. So questioning is a skill. The other skill that's really critical is quality control. Now, at the moment in a classroom, who's in charge of what you learn, when you learn it, how much you learn on it, what the activities are, what the assessment is, what's the feedback? The teacher.
Yeah.
That's hopeless. In AI, you have to teach the kids, is it right or wrong? Is it good enough? Where is the errors? How do I get critique? And I think this is an incredible opportunity, but that's almost the opposite of what happens in our classrooms. And there's a conspiracy. Kids above average prefer the teacher does all that.
Right.
And that is not going to serve us well on AI. So I think right at the moment, my plea and panic is a debate, and I cannot get it started. Everyone wants to talk about banning it or not using it. And I'm saying, no, we have to ask what are the skills and strategies to use it. And I'm pleased we wrote the paper because we do need guardrails. We do need that discussion. It's not either or. Use it or don't use it.
And so if a key skill is going to be asking questions
Yes.
and evaluating the quality of the responses, there's a line of thought that suggests, if anything, the knowledge-rich focus becomes more important because if you don't know what you don't know, you're never going to be able to ask good questions.
Correct.
So does actually more traditional methods and focus on education being things like knowledge and memory become even more important now in the age of AI? Or do we go more towards people viewing skills like creativity and problem solving? And I guess the third part of that is, are they actually competing things, or are they separate areas?
Brad, I'm greedy.
You want everything.
I want them all. We have to. Like we talked about task process and self-regulation, and there's a right time for direct instruction, there's a wrong time. There's a right time for problem solving, there's a wrong time. And that's the art of the science of teaching, is knowing when it's right or wrong. And I think we need to be more explicit to students, and my argument is two. I want an activity about the task, an activity about the problem solving. I want a success criteria about the task, a success criteria about the problem solving. And they have to come together. What's the point of learning this knowledge if it doesn't relate to then us connecting it? And sometimes we need to start with the problem to work out what kids can and not do and do not know and teach that. And it's the same with AI. I'm going to teach them about some content area. How do I get them to interrogate it, to question, to ask, is it good enough, to go deeper, to critique it? And we do that when we ask them to read Shakespeare or do a maths problem or do music. We need to do that with AI.
Okay, one final AI question for you, if I may. I imagine you've seen a lot of people cite one particular part of the paper, which was the graph that you guys produced, which showed how there's this risk that for novices, when we take AI, let's talk about, say, like ChatGPT as an example, will de-skill novices, or maybe not de-skill, but reduce their ability to learn, and so they have a hindrance by using AI, whereas experts who already have deep and rich schema and knowledge, they might get a benefit, and so the gap might get wider and wider. Is that still how you view it?
Absolutely is the case, and you're seeing so much evidence of the defaulting to AI to do the thinking work, to do that task, to do that problem solving, to do that connection. And you're right, that's a double whammy for those who are struggling in the first place. And this is why I'm in a panic. We've got to teach those skills because it's not going away.
And so you'd go for, because of that, therefore we have to teach that skills.
Yes.
You wouldn't go for, because of that, schools should ban it within the classroom while they're developing their knowledge and
My
skills.
argument is that it's not banned, it's the appropriate guardrails.
Right.
It's like saying I'm going to ban a book because there's pornography. I'm going to ban films because there are R-rated movies. Of course we should have guardrails around those. The same in schools.
Yeah.
We've got to know what's appropriate, not appropriate. It's not open slather.
But as it stands, would you describe ChatGPT as being appropriate?
Not as it stands at the moment.
Right.
Firstly, everything you put up on it's public information.
Yep.
And that's a travesty.
Yep.
And secondly, it's kind of like saying, there's the alcohol bar, kids go and choose. And some of them will choose a soft drink and some of them will choose an alcohol. And yet the kids.
Yeah.
We do need to have ways in which we have guardrails around it. We do need to say these are the appropriate and inappropriate uses. That's the purpose of school.
Yeah.
To have the concept of intelligence. How do you succeed in your environment? Our environment now is social media and AI.
Yeah.
There's a lot of teaching we have to do. We cannot ignore it. We cannot pretend it's not there. And banning it is not going to lead to it being uninvented.
Fine. Third and final study. If we're talking about teaching as a concept, I was delighted to see your recent paper, your 2025 one with your colleague O'Leary on learning styles. And I love this paper for two reasons. I've been fascinated by learning styles for 10 or 15 years now. I wrote an article ages ago in a national newspaper in England, and we called it like the zombie myth, because it just doesn't die.
No.
And what's interesting is we're actually seeing, going back to AI quite likes recommending learning styles, which is interesting. The reason I quite like this study particularly is it's quite different, I think, to other learning styles research. So if we look back at the Paschler 2008 paper, probably the best analysis and just step-by-step debunking any claims around learning styles. But this paper is different. This paper doesn't look at if they help or not. What I like about this paper, it talks about almost like the psychology of why do people believe it and why does it endure? Essentially, why is it a zombie myth? And I thought that was really interesting. And there were 5 different areas that caught my eye. The first one was this idea of it appeals to people because of individualization. And this is really interesting because I always think, I don't know if you had it in Australia, we had these things back in like 20 years ago called like Magic Eye, which is these like squiggly posters. And if you squint, you can kind of see a picture in it. And I kind of equate that to learning myths of like, if you squint, there's some tiny 1% resemblance of truth and it just gets distorted. And so the truth here for me is everyone is different and everyone is individual and our personalities and our history are unique. And therefore you can see how if that gets morphed into, because everyone is an individual, therefore everyone has this individual learning style.
Correct.
But we're more similar than we are different. And so I thought that was really interesting that was one of the key points you made in that paper. So that was point number 1. And the other one I thought was interesting was you talk about people confusing preference with style. I wonder if you could just elaborate on that for me, because I think that gets to the heart of one of the issues with learning styles.
And like that paper came about, like my fascination with meta-analyses is why it occurs, why it occurs.
Yeah.
And what we were discovering is that more and more studies were being published that showed learning styles had a high effect size.
Right.
And a person wrote to me out of the blue and said, why? It took me 2 years with Tim O'Leary to work through that and going back through all the studies, because it does have a high effect. But it's because of what you're saying, the mix-up of strategies and preferences, the way in which, like take verbal preference style. Well, of course, kids who are highly verbal are going to do better at highly verbal tasks.
Yeah.
So it was that correlation that was messing things up.
Right.
And so then you got to the strategies and the preferences. And like we've known since the Paschler paper and all the others that if I prefer a particular way of doing things, it may not actually be my best way of doing it.
Yeah.
And my colleague, Christine Ruby Davies in New Zealand, found that teachers who use learning styles always used it, particularly with Maori kids and Pacifica kids, to explain that they were kinesthetic visual learners, they weren't verbal learners, and that was okay.
Right.
Now, if you're a visual or a kinesthetic learner, our job is to teach you how to be a verbal learner, not say you're going to do. And when you then look at all the matching studies where they match teaching with the learning styles, and there's not as many as we think they are, it's zero.
Right.
It's nonsense. And so one of the prime missions of that article was to say, learning strategies, yes, Learning preferences, no.
Yeah, I like that, because then it almost gives you permission as an educator to talk about things like retrieval practice
Correct.
and spacing, because we're talking about strategy,
Yes.
which I think is interesting. The other thought I thought was really interesting that you allude to in it was it sounds sciencey, and it's quite alluring. People like the sound of it because it sounds like it should be backed up by research. You know, it's got some quite nice sounding jargon around learning styles, and therefore we know from other studies that, for example, if you put a picture of the brain up, people are more likely to believe or carry more weight to it. And I think learning styles almost benefits from that misbelief that people have in, like, if it sounds sciencey, it must be true.
But let me try something else on you, Brett. How do you learn?
Slowly at the moment. How do I learn? I think I have to be in a very quiet room.
Now just pause there.
Yeah.
See how this is going to morph into learning styles very quickly?
Right.
And part of the problem that we're arguing is we don't have a very good language about learning.
Yeah.
In fact, my work is called visible learning, not because it's visible, but I want to make it visible. And we, in the business, don't have a good language about learning. What chance have kids got? And when we ask students and teachers how do they learn, it's very quick to go to learning preferences. So you can see why it's popular.
Yeah.
And like, they don't say things like I use retrieval practice, I use deliberate practice, I use spacing.
Yeah.
That's not how people think, but that's actually what the core of learning is.
Yes.
And so my mission.
Yeah, go on, what's your mission?
To get learning, schools as learning organizations.
Yeah.
Like, we have 20,000 hours of classroom observation, including here from England. And when we ask how many times does a teacher think aloud or ask a kid to think aloud in 20,000 hours, it's 0.
Right.
Schools aren't for learning.
Yeah.
They're for teachers talking. And so this is why this whole notion of creating a debate about learning is so critical, but how quickly it slips into preferences.
And so if you had to predict moving forward, so the Pashler paper was almost the best part of 20 years ago, the myth is enduring, and you have shed light as to the psychology as to why. What's your gut feeling if we meet up in 5, 10, 15 years? Like, do you think if you gave, will there be a study in 15 years that shows 90% of teachers still believe in learning styles? Because that number seems to be quite consistent. Or do you think it's getting better and will get better?
No, it's...
do you think it will persist for a while longer?
Yeah, your friend Daisy has published this as well with the 90%. No, it's everywhere. And our job in this business is to have a robust and reasonable discussion about learning.
Yeah.
To replace it.
Yeah.
Not disparage it.
Yeah.
Because the alternative is virtually nothing. And so it's not going to go away until we do this. And if you go to initial teacher education or any professional learning, it's all about teaching. It's never about learning.
Yeah.
And so that's the whole mission. How do we get a discussion about learning? Our kids couldn't care less how you teach, because they know every time they go to a different teacher, it's different.
Yeah.
But they want to know how you did it. And a compelling argument is learning styles.
Yeah.
So let's give them an alternative. Let's talk about, how do you outline and summarize? How do you do space practice interleaving?
Yeah.
How do you do self-regulation and thinking aloud? How do you do transfer? Because that's the core of learning. So my mission is to ask everyone and all your listeners, let's talk about learning and make that the most robust discussion. And as we all know, it's not straightforward, it's not simple, there's not a recipe, it's a very contested area.
Yes.
What an excitement.
Yeah. Well, I always think that as well. It's like, there's this interesting debate around, is there even a science of learning? Or is there sciences of learning? I think there are some general principles that are consistent throughout. Like, we shouldn't overload working memory. We do need to revisit stuff.
And believe it or not, a recent study is about to come out doing incredible brain stuff showing that Piaget was pretty right.
Interesting.
So we know all that stuff.
Yeah. Okay, so
we've forgotten it.
So talking about future studies coming out, just to end with, those are my 3 favorite studies that you've done. Could you give us like an exclusive, a sneak peek? Is there any research that you're currently working on that you find really interesting? Either topics that you've already covered, but it's uncovering something new, or different topics that you haven't written about before? What's on the horizon?
It's a mixture here. Like, one of the things that's intriguing me over the last couple of years was someone said to me about teacher self-concept.
Yeah.
And like, we know a lot about student self-concept. I've even written a book about student self-concept. And I was stunned. It's virtually nothing about teachers' motivation. So we're doing a lot of work on teacher self-concept, starting with what are their motivations, what are their beliefs, what are their capabilities. And we took 50 odd beliefs and said, what works, what doesn't. So that's a fun area we're doing. I'm working with a colleague in the US, Jim Knight, on coaching. The effect size on coaching on improving teacher practice is 0.5.
Right.
The effect size of coaching of improving that teacher practice on students is 0.08.
Okay, so just talk me through those two findings then, because that sounds like they almost sound like in conflict with one
They
another.
are.
So
Because one of the problems is that when people go to coaching, they choose that which they're usually very good at to improve.
Yeah.
So it doesn't have an effect on kids. Like, there's an easy way around it, and I shouldn't say this because it's giving away the theme of the book. But
No, but go on. This is a nice exclusive. Go for it.
Exactly. Is that when you go into coaching and ask what is the behaviors and the attitudes and the skills and the students you want to change, and let's coach to that, you get a big effect.
Right.
But if you go in and say, I'm going to help you improve your feedback, I'm going to help you improve your clarity, we do that, but it doesn't have an effect. And so that's a fascinating whole area of topic that I'm exploring at the moment. And like, here's a weird one.
Yeah.
Why is it the effect size of animals in classrooms is so high?
Interesting.
And I've spent a lot of time over the last while trying to understand, because it is high.
Yeah.
And it turns out it's got nothing to do with the animal. It's to do with the teachers who choose to have the animals in the class.
Interesting, as in there's something about their personality or their culture within the classroom.
And their capabilities and their ability to deal with another intrusion. And it's like I'm doing a lot of work with elite sport at the moment.
Yeah.
And one of my colleagues have done a meta-analysis of sport. And the biggest effect in sport by a long way is home field advantage.
Yes.
Why?
See, I think I know the answer to this one. Influence on the referee.
Correct.
Yes. I did a sports psychology degree, so if I got that one wrong, that would be
and
bad.
it's kind of fascinating.
It is interesting.
And what I'm getting to here is my heart as a researcher is being curious.
Yeah.
My heart is asking the why questions. And that's the fun part. And they paid me to have a career to do this. It's wonderful.
Amazing. Well, you have to promise to either fly back over again to England in a few years' time, and we can talk about pets, coaching, and elite sport, or I'll fly to Australia. John, thank you so much for coming on the pod. And more than that, sincerely, I generally think I can't think of anyone who's done more to put evidence-informed practice at the heart of the profession. So for me at Inner Drive, but also the wider education community, just a big thank you so much.
Thank you, Brad.
For everyone listening, I hope you enjoyed the podcast. I think it's been illuminating and fascinating. Please do let us know what you think. What is your favourite John Hattie study? What stood out the most to you? Please do like, comment, and above all, subscribe. And until next time, see you soon.
If you've enjoyed this episode and want to improve your staff's understanding of the science of learning, you'd simply love Inner Drive's training. We offer brilliant in-person workshops plus online support through the Teachers CPD Academy, trusted by thousands of teachers worldwide. Simply email us now at info@innerdrive.co.uk to take your staff's professional development to the next level.